In a matter of days, the federal government could face a shutdown. It would happen right at 12:01 October 1st.
All of this happening as Congress is still debating spending bills which are needed to fund the government. So question here now is, what does this mean for all of us? Atlanta News First, Carly Barnett joins us now to break down where things stand. Carly.
All right, Savannah Allen, here is what is going on. Well, as we know, spending bills have to pass the House and Senate before making it to the president, and that has to happen before the start of the fiscal year, which is October 1st. And with the House and Senate not able to reach an agreement, the countdown is on. Congress has not been able to agree on 4 of the 12 bills needed to fund the government. More assurances of border security, one of the big sticking points for House Republicans. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is trying to buy more time.
We will pass a continuing resolution, bring that rule up hopefully on Friday.
But some Republicans won't go for it, even if it means a shutdown.
I'm a no and will remain a no. My advice is buckle up. There's turbulence ahead.
Meanwhile, the Senate is working on its own continuing resolution, which has bipartisan support to keep the government open for another 6 weeks. But what if it does shut down? Services such as Medicare, Social Security, and the U.S. Postal Service will be unaffected. But federal operations deemed non-essential come to a halt. Nationally, there are about 4 million federal workers. Here in Georgia, 111,000, not including military. Some will be furloughed. Others, like those in public safety, will stay on the job, all unpaid until the shutdown ends.
1 week without a paycheck could be devastating.
While food stamps and other nutrition programs would continue during the shutdown, federal agencies may have to reduce their support. Agencies like OSHA, the FDA, and EPA would pull back operations. And then there's recreation. A shutdown affects the National Park Service. Georgia has 11 national park sites. And travel, which was just recovering from COVID times.
It stops us from training and hiring air traffic controllers. What that means is, over time, more shortages, more outages, more potential disruption.
And when President Biden was asked today at a visit to California if a shutdown was inevitable, he replied, quote, "I don't think anything's inevitable in politics." But he also added that he doesn't know how to fix it either. Savannah?
All right.